Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the school committee meeting of Thursday, November 14. It's 4 o'clock. Paul, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? And the flag is out the window again.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Today we have our fourth and final candidate for superintendent, Dr. Stephen Hiersche.
Good to see you again, Steve.
Hi, Chava.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming.
Steve, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Good to see you, Paul. How are you, Mac? How are you?
Chris Silverstein.
Chris,
nice to see you again.
David Mears, nice to meet you.
Steve, we have an assortment of questions to ask you and want to welcome you here to the Beverly Public Schools and our beautiful high school. And thank you for coming to share with the rest of the committee a little bit about yourself and your educational leadership and your experiences. First, would you like to give a little opening statement before we proceed into questions?
Sure. I'm presently the interim executive director at the Accept Collaborative, which is pretty fascinating at the moment, having an opportunity to run a collaborative that deal with kids with severe special needs, as well as transporting kids to special education schools has been pretty exciting. I've also had an opportunity to do a lot of work in professional development so far this year too, so it's getting back to my roots. I actually have been working as a superintendent for 17 years. I've been working in many districts. Beverly is much closer to what I grew up in.
Attention please, Ms. Taylor, please call extension 11193.
Because I came from Western Massachusetts, grew up in Holyoke, when Holyoke was actually very much like Beverly now. And working in city environment actually is pretty exciting. When I spent 12 years in Vermont, it was because I skied and the family skied, and we were young and it was a time that you could actually do that. But my first superintendency actually was working with 9 school districts. I had 150 school committee meetings a year. Because we had that, every school committee met twice. So I got an opportunity to work in that kind of environment and get used to the democracy that really is Vermont and town meeting. Over recent years, in working in some communities and towns in Massachusetts, it's getting harder and harder for that process to work and work successfully. So when I look at the time when I was superintendent that I felt most at home and worked very well with government was when I was in Watertown. And you'll forgive me because Watertown is a city that gets to call itself a town. So just put, every time I say town, put in city. But the opportunity to work with city government, the opportunity to do long-range planning, to make sure that the schools got the support that they need, but we were the asset to the community that was necessary, was really pretty exciting time, and a pretty volatile time because we were dealing with healthcare issues and trying to figure out a way in which to wade through that very difficult financial environment. So I've had a lot of experience around that. My background is also math and technology. So I will always say that I'm a math teacher at heart, always will be. Done a lot of work with choosing math series over time, working with teachers to make the right choices for kids and to make the right choices for them. And also, I go all the way back to the 70s where I was teaching computer science. And back then, you taught computer science if you're in the faculty room and they said, we have a whole bunch of computers coming in. Did anybody take a computer course? And I had. So I got an opportunity to do that. But during the course of my career, either my school or my district has always been seen as a leader around the use of technology in the classroom for instruction. Whether it's Plymouth or Watertown or even Framingham now. the leadership that the districts provided because of the understanding that the impact that technology can have on instruction in the classroom, that those districts had made them leaders in the area. So I bring that with me, and I also bring a passion for being a teacher. I don't think I'm a whole lot different than I was when I was teaching mathematics at Westfield High School, and the strategies are similar and the same, and certainly the people who are working with me in the school districts now look a heck of a lot younger than they used to. So I still teach, and I spend a lot of time going through that process. So superintendency has always been at my soul.
Thank you. So your first real question. What do you believe to be the top 3 issues facing the Beverly Public Schools? And with that in mind, if you would just keep one of those and state your plan of attack for dealing with that.
The top 3 things facing Beverly is first and foremost stability. You've been going through some switches in leadership, and a lot of that stems from making sure you have a good succession plan. So building a succession plan is important. The second piece that I've been reading is you've been wrestling with the math series in the elementary school. I probably have been part of the process of changing from everyday math at least 3 or 4 times in my career at this point. And the challenge with that really is that parents don't know how to use everyday math in order to be able to work with their kids well. And then the third piece is what we're all facing, is how do you look into the future, global education, 21st century learning in an environment of mandates, supervision and evaluation, Common Core. All of those things need to be managed because the conversation has to move to global education and 21st century learning. For me, that's the piece that we've got to figure out how to get back to. I'm doing some work now with the University of Oregon around global education. Some of you may have seen Young Zhao. He's been in the area as a national speaker. Young and I, actually, I'm going to be with him this weekend because we're looking at some opportunities. But how do you get the conversation into what charges us and makes us excited as educators? It's not going through the rote process of improving your supervision and evaluation. It's not going through the process of doing Common Core, which is another set of tools and curricular outlines that we've done before. It's about what does the future look like for our kids and how do we find a way to engage in that conversation. The kids right now are learning all the time. They're learning in spite of us. They're learning with us. And in many cases, their learning actually can lead what we're trying to accomplish for kids in schools. But it's engaging them in a place where they live and providing that kind of education for them that's really pretty exciting. So when we go from MCAS to PARC, we go from one 20th century assessment tool to another 20th century assessment tool. We're not in the 20th century anymore. So how do we get kids into real world activities that demonstrate what they've learned in a very deep way? So the theory is good around Common Core, which is we're not going to do a curriculum that's a mile wide anymore. We're going to get into depth. But in execution, is that actually going to happen? And I'm not sure it is. So as Beverly will have to do, how do we maintain that balance of doing what we need to do around Common Core and the requirements of Race to the Top? And as we had a conversation in Framingham a number of years ago when they weren't going to take the $700,000 in Race to the Top money, and I said, well, everybody's going to have to comply to Race to the Top anyway, so could we take the $700,000 so we could actually cause it to happen? That's playing out. So Race to the Top is forcing all of us, whether we took Race to the Top money or not, to now focus on a national agenda that is telling us what to do. So as a leader, you need to do what you need to do in dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and getting the value out of a new supervision and evaluation model, the value out of PARC, the value out of anything that we're required to do right now, but make sure that it doesn't control the conversation. Because if we do our job well as a school district, all the rest of it will take care of itself. The interesting part was when I got to Watertown, the focus was on our MCAS scores. People wanted our MCAS scores to be very high. Kids were achieving well, they were getting into any colleges that they wanted, but we were about the state average for MCAS scores. So we set about coming up with a way to change the conversation for the community. So we started doing real demonstrations of what kids knew at the other end of their learning. And we were very fortunate because we didn't have a FIRST robotics program, so we started a FIRST robotics program. We got the community involved in it. It wasn't a lot of money. It was mostly mentors from the community, engineers, people from 7 Cycles. I do bicycle, and 7 Cycles is one of the better bicycles companies in the world. They happen to be in Watertown. So they actually sent one of their welders over, so our robots really had the most beautiful, elegant welds you've ever seen. But it was a community involvement. And then what we did was we showcased that as well as some of our other robotics programs at the school committee meeting for 10 minutes at the very beginning of the meeting for the community to see. And then we had the annual fair on the square in the fall. We brought the robot to previous year's robot to Fair in the Square, had that demonstration, had the kids explaining to the community what that was all about, and that was a real world example of what the kids had learned. And those are the kinds of things that we need to do, because the kids are our best asset. We were having a conversation today at the collaborative. I think the level of ability to articulate in this generation of kids is the highest I've ever seen. So when they're out in public, when they're speaking, when they are representing the school, they are a really good example of what we've accomplished as an educational system. So pushing them forward and making sure that they're out there is a really important part of the process. So for me, the big one is maintaining that balance. So make sure that we, I don't want to say dot our I's and cross our T's, but dot our I's and cross our T's, and then make sure that what we believe as a school district is important for the kids in Beverly is where we spend most of our time and energy.
Thank you. Chris, you have our next question.
Yes. How do you plan to raise the performance level of the lowest achieving students without neglecting the highest performing students, as well as addressing those who fall in the middle?
I actually was working with someone today, and we were having that conversation. So how do we put the tools in the hands of teachers that can support them to help all kids in the classes that they have? So unlike other points in time in education, the breadth of student achievement and student ability in each classroom is very broad. So when we talk about differentiated instruction, teachers know how to differentiate instruction, but what they're faced with is a very broad differentiation and not the tools to be able to do that. So it's about identifying tools that make sense rather than the one-size-fits-all textbooks that we used to provide. So technology is part of the answer. The other part of the answer is giving teachers the kinds of professional development they need to be able to work with both groups. And in some cases it's going to be other resources, human resources in their room as well in order to be able to do that. I think that one thing that I've learned over time is that kids are very unique, so they meet whatever bar we set. So if the bar is low, they hit a low bar. If the bar is high, they hit a high bar. And I think that's what we learned by standards-based education, was to tell that 20 years ago we probably weren't setting the bar high enough for kids. They were probably more capable than we gave them credit for. But in order to be able to support all of the kids in a classroom with a broad level of abilities, you have to have that kind of support. So There's teaming in the middle school, which I know you have. So how do you share the wealth of those teachers? We were working in Watertown to create elementary teams so that the elementary teacher on that team that happened to be exceptional in mathematics, all kids in that team got an opportunity to be with that teacher to excel or to remediate because they had that expertise. And we made sure that the teams were made up of teachers that that each had an expertise so that the kids could share that. But it's grouping and regrouping and making sure that we're taking advantage of all of the excellence that we have in our teaching staff. The other part is to make sure that the professional development is hitting what they need. We oftentimes think we know what teachers need, and then we create a professional development program, and they come to it and they go, well, that's not really what I needed. I needed something else. And one of the things that we're wrestling with right now is we're trying to help, at the collaborative, we're trying to help our 14 districts address DDMs. So we went to the curriculum people and we said, what do you need? You know, we can provide almost anything. They said, what we need is time. So what we've created is 2 sessions, one in the fall and one in the spring, where we've brought in people to frame the conversation in the morning early, and then let the teachers spend time in that professional development opportunity working together. So schools are sending teams of people. We're providing a place where they're not actually still in the school district, so nobody can come down the hall and talk to them. And we're also creating a framework that makes sure that they get done what they need to get done. Same thing has to happen in school districts, because the challenge for everybody, and it can't be any different in Beverly, is we don't have enough time. And it's structuring the time to get done what we need to, but make sure that we're listening to what value we can provide for teachers to make sure that they can do a better job. So it's making sure that we do that with a long view, so we know what the next 2 or 3 years of professional development is going to be focused on. We get the input that we need, and we make sure that we evaluate. The closing part of the evaluation, probably the most important part, is asking whether or not what was provided actually met the needs that the teachers saw. And then if not, you have to ask the second question. So if this didn't meet your needs, what could we have done that would have better met your needs? And that's really probably the biggest challenge that we have, is figuring that out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chesa has our next question.
What have you done in your current or former role to support teachers, and what would you do in your role as superintendent to support them? Certainly touched on that, obviously, in the last question. So.
I think that I've always worked closely with teachers. I've always worked closely to provide opportunities to utilize teachers in the school district to maximize what we can get done. So when we were doing the elementary math series in Watertown, what we did is we asked for volunteers. We made sure that we had volunteers from each grade level and each school. And then we created a framework for them to go through an analysis of several math series. We actually trimmed down, we didn't let them look at anything. We looked at the ones that were meeting the state frameworks at the time and that we had heard good information from other districts on, and we put that together. We also we actually spent that summer providing group skills for teachers. We actually ran a 1 credit course in the summertime to teach teachers how to do group process, to how to lead a group, how to get them from one end to the other. And then we framed it, then we stepped back, and this teacher group went through the process of analyzing all 3 mathematics series that we were looking at the time. They came up with what they felt was the appropriate recommendation. They actually presented back to their constituents back in their schools, kept them abreast as we were going through this process, And the really nice part is, as a finishing piece, they looked at, all 3 series had holes. There was just stuff it didn't cover. So they actually went through with the one that they made the recommendation on, filled the holes with materials, and put together a toolkit for all of the teachers back in the schools that had the materials already made for the holes in the program. That was an example of, we were working on science at the time, we were working on literacy. If we didn't have a team approach, and if we didn't have a set of people who were leaders from within, we weren't going to get all that work done, and we weren't going to get it done at the quality that we needed to. So it's really about utilizing your resources. The biggest resource we have in any school district is our teaching force. The other thing that's true about the teaching force is it's the most stable element of your educational system as well. Because a lot of them have been here quite some time and have the ability to know what to look at and what not to look at, because we've done it before. So it short circuits some of the conversations that you have. But utilizing the leadership from within, making sure that they're part of the process is important. I also work very closely with the Teachers Association everywhere I am. And the budget process in particular is a process that we sort of do together. So at the very beginning of the process, I go through with the Teachers Association everything that I know about the finances of the community, about what we're looking at in the future, and what we're trying to accomplish before the budget process starts. And then having that conversation about the best way to deal with that as we move forward, so that at the other end of it, Beverly Public Schools is a place we all want to be. It's a place that we built together, that we support together. And having a conversation, in fact in the collaborative we were having a conversation the other day, because we're short-staffed. Everybody's short-staffed. Legitimately short-staffed because of the finances we've had. And so what happens is, in talking to them, we have 2 ways we can go. We can go to give you raises that you probably deserve because you've been short-shifted, or we can add staff because you're already working as many hours as you can. You can't work more hours than you are. Or we can work together and figure out how to come somewhere in the middle where there's a balance between what we're looking at for salary increases and what we're looking at for added support in the office. So I've done the same thing with the Teachers Association. When we made the change in Watertown from 90-10 to 80-20, and we were one of the second wave of communities that went into the GIC, we did that together between the teacher leadership and myself, of looking at the same information, understanding how that was going to impact going out. And the year that Watertown went into the GIC and went from 90-10 to 80-20, the teachers got a 4.5% raise that year. And everyone, including the city council, got up and supported it because we saved Watertown over $2 million a year by switching to the GIC and from 90-10 to 80-20. It was difficult, but the desire to have and to be able to have a financial support in the community was important to what we were trying to accomplish for the kids in the community. So we worked on it together.
The 2 union reps are over there with us.
Yeah, I've only given 4.5% once in my entire life.
Can you tell me what math program did you end up with in Watertown?
In Watertown, we ended up, I'm trying to remember what it became. It was Think Math. We actually developed it in Watertown with EDC. So it actually was already in resident. In Hopkinton, we just went to Envision Math. And Envision Math worked pretty well because 3 of the school districts around Hopkinton also are in Envision Math. So we've created kind of a users group between the 3 districts because some of them started before we did. So we were able to get some support in that process.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Mr. Kavanaugh, you're up.
Hi. Communication is critical in a school district the size of Beverly. How would you ensure board members, principals, and senior leadership are kept informed of district initiatives, needs, and priorities?
I meet with my senior leadership in the office weekly. It's stuff you learn as you get a little farther along and a little more experienced. I had to remember that early in my career that if I was having a conversation with everybody, that didn't mean everybody had the conversation. So I had a group really early in my career that said to me, you're going to meet with us once a week because I had that conversation with you, they had that conversation with you, and we don't know what's going on. So we meet once a week to make sure that we know what each other's doing and to make sure that we do some planning together. I meet with the principals and the senior leadership team twice a month. I'm very strict about my time because I was a principal for a long time, and I understand that getting out of your building isn't necessarily as easy as you might like. So if it's a 2-hour meeting, it's a 2-hour meeting. And we stay tight on the agenda. The agendas are created together. We do a Google Docs of the agenda. They can add stuff to the agenda, and then just before the meeting I rearrange things to make sure that we can do it in 2 hours. The teachers, it depends. So it depends on what we're working on. If it's something major, I like to actually meet with the teachers. So my first year in Framingham, we were looking at a budget that was going to be down $8 million going into my second year. We got it up to only $6 million down, but it was a significant shift. I actually held meetings for the staff for them to ask questions. Some of the theme was there's a lot of rumors out there, so this is a meeting to come and ask about the rumors because they're more than likely not true. Because in a large district like Framingham, which is 8,400 kids and 12 schools, rumors are hard to derail. So it was making sure that people had the facts about what we were doing. So as we got closer to the fact that we were going to have to reduce the force by 50, we ended up doing 51 people. Everybody knew what we were doing. And everybody knew that we were doing everything we could to make sure that nobody actually lost their job. So teachers worked very closely with us that year. So if I was thinking about retirement, I didn't necessarily have an early notification date, but because of how we were trying to minimize the impact of that cut on the school system, people were letting us know early. And then we would look at the position as to whether it was a position that we needed to fill or not, because every time we didn't have to fill a position, it saved 2 jobs. So we did that together. They knew about what I was looking at for administrative reductions as well as everything else. We had those conversations. When I look at any budget, whether it's going up or down, the focus is on the classroom. I've never honestly believed that I could get into every classroom and actually have an impact. So for the kids, it's critical that the classrooms are the area that you continue to maintain your resources all the way through the process. We talked out, we were looking at areas where we had to reduce music. We looked at whether we were going to eliminate music. I don't eliminate programs unless, actually I don't think I've ever eliminated a program unless it should be eliminated. We made sure everybody understood we were doing a reduction because if you eliminate, you never get it back. If you reduce, you get it back at the point in which you actually have better finances. But I like to be direct with people. I like people to be able to ask straight questions and get straight answers. And while I've utilized emails to get stuff out to people during serious times or over major issues. I still have not found a better way to do it than to do it personally and to have that kind of conversation. So I try to do that. We make sure that, I've always made sure that emails go out, people know what's going on. I always have made available to the community as well all of our documentation through the budget process. Anything that goes to the school committee is posted either that day or the next day so that everybody in the community knows what we're talking about. I've learned to Be more careful for the school committee because when you do a PowerPoint and then the PowerPoint is online, if that person didn't actually watch the meeting, the PowerPoint does not necessarily make sense. So in some cases, we've gone back and said, I'm not going to post the PowerPoint. I'm going to post much more full description of what we actually were talking about so that people knew what was going on out there. From the standpoint of the school committee, I've always done retreats in the summer. It's a great opportunity for us to get on the same page, to work together. It's also a great opportunity for us to practice the group dynamic that we are, so that when there's a crisis, everybody kind of falls into what we've practiced and what we're used to, and that works well. I also have spent a lot of time with the committee as well as the staff with stuff that we're reading. So when I was in Watertown, it was when The World is Flat was hot. And we read The World is Flat as an administrative team. We had a retreat in the summertime that I actually backed up. The administrators had a retreat. The school committee started their retreat with us. I gave the school committee The World is Flat to read as well. We had spent a couple days talking about the educational ramifications of The World is Flat and how should we be looking at education differently because of this, what you read in The World is Flat. So that actually went out to the staff. Most of my principals bought The World is Flat for all of their staff members. The high school had a really heated conversation about whether he was completely and totally wrong or it was something that we really need to pay attention to. So it created a lively conversation, but it was all in the context of, should we pay attention to it? Is there something as a school district we need to do different because of that? In Framingham, we read Two Minds by Daniel Pink. School committee started that way with me, and we were discussing Daniel Pink and what the important part of that is. And that's because there was a lot of cry for us to become STEM. And there's a caution to STEM that is really important because STEM doesn't include the arts. Daniel Pink includes the arts as the most important thing that we have. So it's getting back, so it's interesting that it's now being called STEAM. But it's interesting to see that focus was important. So we talked about that. And I didn't know that I was going to be cutting $6 million that year. But it helped our conversation when we got down to the end of our discussions on how we were going to deal with a $6 million loss. And the arts never really took the hit because we had the other conversation. And I think that's the important part of how you do that. The other part is, like you, I hate surprises. So I spend a lot of time on the phone, if necessary, with school committee members to make sure that that there might be a situation out there where there might be something that you're going to hear from the community. I'm always careful to make sure that you have what you can have and not have what you can't. But it's important that you know what's out there, and it's important to know that we're on top of it. So that's another part of it. And I expect the same thing from my administrators. The worst thing I can do is have one of you call me and say, did you know? And on the other end of it, I would of course say, of course I did. But then there would be a phone call going out and say, how come I didn't know? So that's an important part of the process too. We started to play with Twitter. I'm still not sure. There's a way to push out information now that I think is beneficial to school districts from the standpoint of it captures back the story that suddenly has become somebody's blog and you don't know whether it has any validity to it or not, or anybody's on the other end. So it does provide that opportunity to push real information out and honest information.
Thank you. Paul Manzo has our next question for you.
Dr. Hiersche, I would like to ask how you've balanced as superintendent the academic program offerings against budgetary constraints, and if you could give us some real-life examples of how you've done that. I think you already have, but if you could hit some more.
Yeah, we become really creative. I think the piece now is the focus on enhancing the AP courses in all school districts. I think that's critical to increase that. It's not cheap because you have to go through the training that's pretty expensive, but it's important that you are stabilizing your teaching force so that if you have to make that, if you make that commitment to AP, that teacher stays in the school district for a period of time. The other piece that there are occasionally some grants out for that I've grabbed before, in fact, we used our Race to the Top money to support pre-AP training for middle school teachers. It was a great use of our Race to the Top money. The teachers were really interested in that process. It gave them a really good way to enhance the instruction that they were providing and also make that tied into what we were doing in the future. I think there's other academic decisions that you have to make that require that you understand financing well, both at the state level and the municipal level. So we did two major things in Framingham in my last year. So one of our underperforming elementary schools is an International Baccalaureate primary program school. What we did was we spent a lot of time disaggregating out the money that we would have spent on the teachers in that school anyway. And the agreement that we had to make was that we were going to segregate that money for them, make sure that it went to their International Baccalaureate training, and it actually didn't cost us any more money than it would have anyway. So that was a really important part to go through that. So everybody kind of thought it was a good idea, but they were all afraid of how expensive it was going to be over time. And because the primary and middle school program is actually whole school reform, it's not like the high school program, which is really a select set of kids. We were able to do that disaggregation. The second piece was I was shocked when I got to Framingham because of some of our demographics that we were not full-day kindergarten. And we went through the Chapter 70 funds carefully for the community, got them to understand that when those half-day kids became full-day, how much additional Chapter 70 money was going to come into the district. Now, unfortunately, it comes in the following year. But we did the dollars for them. We went through the whole process. We went through the explanation of what the educational benefit was going to be. We looked at the test scores in the early years for kids. And we saw there was a stark difference between kids that were with us for a full year and kids that weren't with us for a full year. And it had nothing to do with socioeconomic demographics either. I mean, there was a difference. The kids were taking 3 years to catch up if they weren't in full-day kindergarten with us. So we made the educational case. That was not the hard case. The hard case was financial. So we went through it for the community. We did all the numbers for town meeting. The town manager and the chief financial officer actually were behind us. Town meeting appropriated an extra $600,000 that year specifically for the conversion from half-day kindergarten to free full-day kindergarten. And it will have probably the biggest bang for your buck from the standpoint of helping student achievement over time. So that case was made, we got that supported. The other piece is in looking at the academics, we went to the community. Each of my communities, I've gotten substantial money for support for technology. Usually through capital, which is not the best way I want to do it, but it's about the only way you can bring yourself up to speed unless you build a new building, and then unfortunately 5 years later everything's old and you have to figure out how to deal with that. But we made the case to the community around the academic impact it was going to have on the kids in the classroom if in fact we had high-tech classrooms. And the educational benefit was fairly easy to prove. We did some test cases with teachers so that the community, anybody in the community could, by appointment, come in and see what was going on in the classroom so they could see what the difference was. But the focus was really around academic, and it was around, we made a deal. So the $2 million was appropriated over 4 years, $500,000 a year. And the deal was, and the community, we showed the community every year, the deal was that at the end of the 4-year cycle, we would have $500,000 identified in the budget that would now take up the process of continuing the technology that we had in the schools. And every year we reported where we were to the community from the standpoint of getting close to that $500,000 so that we could continue that process. So in each and every case, there's 3 ways you get money. One is to ask for more, which is certainly the one that I've done often enough. The second is to look at your reallocation of your present resources. And you know, I've always told this story, and having been superintendent in Plymouth, I found that K through 6 taught the Pilgrims. So when we were looking at that, and there was a good solid reason for doing that, seeing as how we were in Plymouth, there was an allocation of resources that we were providing at each grade level for something that we really didn't need to do every year. So we really had that conversation about, if we can free up this money, what would we use it for? What would we move it to? And we were having a lot of trouble meeting science, getting enough science materials in the classroom for the elementary teachers. So the elementary teachers looked at the frameworks, moved the teaching of the Pilgrims to the level that it really had to be taught at, was supposed to be taught at, and then took the reallocation of resources to put that in. The other thing is, people get creative about finances when you give them permission. So in Watertown, we were building mobile carts. We had an allocation that we had figured out we were going to do. And then I started walking through the high school and the middle school and finding carts that were more than what I thought we had purchased. And what had happened is, teachers had started to ask, so if we as a department or we as a team sit down and look at our budgets that we spend every year, and we can put aside $15,000, can we buy a mobile cart for the team? Or can we buy a mobile cart for the department? And I said, sure. And so that's what they did. So they deferred some things. The science department at the high school deferred purchasing biology textbooks that year, and did some other deferment of things for a single year so that they could get another cart because they needed it to be able to meet the need of the kids in the classroom. So a lot of it's allowing creativity that actually gets you either financial savings or at least uses the same money that you have differently.
Great, thank you.
David, you have our next question.
Dr. Hiersche, how would you describe your leadership style?
I'm very collaborative. I have an open door, much to my detriment sometimes. I usually need an administrative assistant that closes my door every once in a while and says you can't get in. But from a collaborative standpoint, I've learned over time that it's important that you collaborate over the big things, but you can't collaborate over everything. So when I first became a high school principal, I was going to be the greatest collaborative leader in the entire free world. So about January, my staff said to me, could we stop collaborating over whether the kids wear hats or not, and could you just tell us what you want to do? We don't even care anymore. So that was kind of a wake-up call to spend the time together around the things that are going to make substantive changes in what goes on in the building, where more minds together comes up with a better solution than one mind might be. I think the other part that I have to be honest about is there are periods of time as superintendent of schools where you can't be collaborative. So when I was cutting $6 million and I was cutting staff, at the end, we weren't doing a lot of collaborating. I was going to get blamed for it anyway, so we needed to make the decisions that had to be made. And then people could feel about the decision the way they needed to feel about the decision, but the decision had to be made, and it couldn't be made slowly. One of the issues in Framingham is the year that we had the $6 million loss, the town meeting closed, I believe it was the 31st of May. And our contracts required notification 2 weeks later. So we were dealing with a $6 million reduction and 14 days to do that. So we worked very feverishly together, but I was making the decisions at the end that were necessary to do that. We worked with the association very closely because there wasn't much choice, because we couldn't get into arguments over what the contract said. We had to be in the same room together, agreeing on what the contract said, and then doing what we needed to do afterwards. So there are times when that's not what happens. I think the other part of it is, for me, as a core part of who I am as a leader, I believe in the public education system in this country. I think we've got to change, don't get me wrong, and I think we need to make substantial change, but I think the ideas are out there. I think the issue is, how do we get to the other part of that? A lot of times what happens is the constant inertia, which draws us back when we've made a serious decision that pulls us back into what's happened before. So I always get the message as superintendent that I expect you to be able to increase student performance. I expect you to make us more efficient. I expect all of those kinds of things to occur. But when school opens in September, I want it to look exactly like it did last year. And we think that comes internal. It's not just internal. It comes from the parents. It comes from the community. So you constantly have to work to make sure that people understand that. I think the other part of my leadership is that I believe very strongly that we have enormous capacity in a school district to lead. And I believe that it's my responsibility to teach, to identify people who are future leaders, make sure they have the tools in their hand to be able to do that, and in the best case scenario, get out of their way when they're doing something well. As a leader, you gotta know when to get out of the way. And that's a real key skill of being able to do that. I think the other piece that's important is I listen and I connect the dots rapidly. So when I start in a school district, I spend time in the district listening. And people tell you things that, if you are good at connecting the dots, begins to paint a very significant picture that then creates the opportunity to move forward as a school district in the areas, and people just kind of go, well, I always thought it should be that way. In which case, the power of moving forward happens pretty rapidly. But listening is a real key. Collaboration, I've never felt that I had all the right answers, so it's important that people are engaged in the conversation, have the same information I do over key decisions, and we talk about what the right avenue is to take afterwards.
Thank you.
Back to Paul for our next question.
In Beverly and a lot of districts, we think technology is a critical tool to support student learning. But there's an increasing need to bring families up to speed with technology. Could you tell us how you will address this need as your role as a new superintendent in Beverly?
Yeah, I think that's kind of been my passion and what I've been doing for a really long time. And I think that we have a golden age of opportunity right now to make sure that the classrooms are rich. The classrooms are the kind of classrooms that kids should be in. And that parents understand that they have a role and responsibility in that as well. I was thinking about that the other day. So I used to do, as a high school principal, I used to bring parents in and we used to talk about how to manage the fact that their kids were going to alcohol parties and pot parties and things like that. And we talked to parents about their roles and responsibilities and giving them an opportunity to really think that saying no is actually a good thing for a parent to do every once in a while. We have a new scenario right now, which is there's a lot of stuff going on through social media that spills into schools. Oftentimes I think educators go, well, why aren't the parents doing something about that? And unfortunately, we're forgetting that maybe they don't know how. That their kids are actually really good at this stuff, so you really have to kind of be pretty good at it yourself. But I think there's a role for us to play to make sure that parents actually understand that. The other part is making sure that kids understand responsibility. So we used to do, and I've created many courses, which is computers and society courses. We really have to have responsibility in every classroom. So if kids are going to be able to use their smart devices in the classroom, that's great. But they should only be using it for appropriate reasons and not doing other things. We legislated for a period of time that you can't have your smartphone in your class. That didn't mean they weren't there, and kids went underground. I think the thing that I was probably most surprised at is that kids apparently have eyes on the end of their fingers because they can actually text without actually seeing the screen. So that was happening. I think our responsibility is to say, this is a tool that you're using in this classroom and in this school, so you have a responsibility to use it appropriately while you're here. And if you're not going to use it appropriately, we will deal with it. But we want you to understand why it has to be used appropriately. The second part of it is sustainability. How can we sustain the technology that's in our schools right now? I have one of my colleagues who built a school, brand new school, has marvelous technology. He actually kept telling me that while we were in Framingham together, and I kept saying to him, so when was your school built? And by the end, that material, which was the best technology we had in the school district, was now 5 years old. And no thought to how we were going to sustain that, how we were going to make that doable. And I don't know a way that it's sustainable without utilizing what kids already have to support what's going on in the classroom. So the teachers need the tool. And I've always been a strong supporter of a projection device and a laptop for every teacher because of what they can provide to this class, because of the projector and because of the laptop. From a kid's standpoint, the kids have lots of devices. It's a challenge. When I got to Hopkinton, they had made a decision similar to Beverly to have a one-to-one program. And they had chosen Apple. They had gone the lease route. I had some questions about it. And we actually listened to the kids. So we did a forum with the kids for the parents. And we asked the kids, because we didn't say the kids couldn't bring their own devices, we actually let them. So some of the kids were bringing PCs to class. And we actually listened to them. So was there anything that your having a PC prevented you from being able to do in class? And the kids' answer was absolutely nothing. We got concerned about how does a teacher support a kid on multiple platforms. So the example in the conversation we had was around using iVideo versus if I've got a full-blown Adobe suite on the PC, how's the teacher going to be able to support this and support this? Particularly because Adobe is a pretty complex program to be able to use. And we really hadn't had any kids that had asked those questions. But the other part of it is we began to look at another way to support kids. So is there a way in which the teacher doesn't get caught in that conversation, but the technology department has somebody sit in the library of the school? And it's known as, I've got a problem with my PC, can I have help? Session where it's focused. but it wasn't expecting our teaching staff to do more than one platform in supporting kids in the classroom. So we looked at that as part of the process of building that. I've been trying to build one-to-one access for probably 10 years because that's the answer. We have to have a way that when kids come into our schools, they log on to our system takes it over, their Beverly Public Schools desktop comes up, everything else they have is not available, but all of the materials that we have are available. And they can save things to our server, all of those kinds of things. We're close to having that done. I did some work with Stoneware a few years ago. They weren't very far. Framingham's actually using it now, so I'm anxious to see how they're doing with it. But that's the kind of piece that we need to do, because we need to protect our system, but we also need to maximize the use for kids. And one of the reasons that I've always looked at access is that for most kids, they're going to have a device they can use. For the kids who don't have a device that they can use, we have a responsibility as a school district, as a community. So I would rather see our limited resources going to leveling the playing field for the kids who don't have that opportunity rather than the other way around. When you start doing parent education around that, you just need to be careful who's in the room. So when I was in Hopkinton, we had a lot of, EMC is, World Headquarters is in Hopkinton. So we had a lot of people that had very strong opinions about platforms. So the year I was there, we kind of pulled them aside, let them argue with me about platforms, because I love to argue about platforms, but made sure that they weren't taking the conversation away from the parents who didn't have the in-depth knowledge that they had to even be able to have that conversation, but got that information out to them. We did a boot camp for everyone that was coming. They had to come with their parent and their child. The first question that we hadn't thought of was, we had one high school student who was not going to give her father the administrative rights to her laptop, and we had set it up that way, so we backed off and we said, no, she's not 18, so she doesn't get to make that call, and we redid that. But we also listened to that process and made sure the parents understood what their responsibility was as well. But the piece that you have to be able to do is make sure that you've done enough professional development for the staff. And I think some of the things that I was worried about in the first year of implementation of the one-to-one in Hopkinton is we hadn't done enough professional development with the staff. And so it was, in some cases, it was being used as an electronic notepad as opposed to an educational device. And that was our fault for not having provided that opportunity for teachers to do that. So it's really making it robust. I think the thing that I've always believed that worked from the student panel is we need to listen to kids. When I used to teach computer science, I didn't have enough time to look at that piece of software. But you know, I had a kid in my class that if I gave him the piece of software and said, take it home this weekend, and you can come in and teach it to the class the next Monday, they did. So we need to engage them in the process of our own learning and making sure that they're part of that as well.
Thank you.
Mayor Scanlon, you have our next question.
Assume a student comes to you saying, I'm being discriminated against by a teacher.
Yep.
Tell us how you would take it from there.
First thing I ask is, did you go to your principal? If they got through the principal and ended up with me, then I listen very, very carefully, and then make sure that, depending on the age, the parents are either involved, or if they're 18, they're not, because that's the kid's call. But then we go through a formal investigation. If it's not real, it has to be done in a formal way to protect the teacher. If it is real, it has to be done in a formal way, so you're doing it appropriately and consistent with your policies and procedures. We had a teacher, we had a actually van driver this year who a kid was saying that she was being inappropriate with him. We didn't believe that she was. However, we had an obligation to file a 51A because of what the kid was saying. And my transportation coordinator was, just wondering what she should do. Again, that's a charge. That's important that it goes into a formal process for the protection of everyone, the kid and the staff member. And you let that play out. But my role is to make sure that that happens the way it should.
Thank you.
Chris, back to you for our next question.
Sure. Please give us an example of an unpopular decision that you've made. How did you proceed with the decision? What factors did you consider? And what were the results?
Well, probably every decision is unpopular with someone. I think that was the freeing part about snow days, because I learned very early that no matter what call I made, it was wrong. So I think that probably one of the unpopular decisions I made was in dealing with National Honor Society when I was a high school principal. And I won't say that I haven't dealt with this as superintendent, but where I learned how to handle it was as high school principal. So when I was a high school principal, we were National Honor Society, where the people who were making a decision on the kids were unknown. The criteria that they were using was known, but the actual documentation that was coming to them was anonymous. So a parent challenged it. I looked at the process that we were going through. We could not continue to do that process. The teachers hadn't done anything wrong that were on that piece, but we had not been upfront about it. And the parent felt that there was a teacher out there undermining the child's ability to get into National Honor Society. And as a school department, as a school, we knew that wasn't so, because the child really didn't deserve to be on National Honor Society. But we weren't able to explain that appropriately to the parent. So what we did was, I did not undo the process that had been done this year, because we had been upfront about it, everything was done correctly. But we engaged in how we were going to give parents better criteria and better understanding of what went on, and that it wasn't a mystery. And if you have some questions, it won't be the first time you've heard that. So what was happening is, it was a process where a child was just a pain in the neck, but he was a pain in the neck all the time. But some teachers chose to wait until National Honor Society and him not getting in for the parents to find out that the kid had been a problem. So we spent a lot of time and agreed that if a teacher was going to put in information on a child that was going to negatively affect the National Honor Society, that was not going to be the first time the parents had heard it from that teacher. So the following year, we explained that to all of the parents. We explained it to the staff. The initial feeling was that the staff wasn't going to be honest anymore. We had the conversation. I had much more faith in my staff than that. And so it worked much better. So we felt much better about it. So no child got dumped at the end of a National Honor Society process without understanding why. And I think we set up structures sometime to protect us against things that I'm not sure we need protection against. So it was my sense at that time that that was where we were. I felt as a building principal, and I feel as a superintendent, that when you take over a process that's in place, it was explained correctly and it was followed correctly. Whether or not you agree with the process, it was followed, so you have to support it. However, you then have to do something about it for the following year. That's one. I could give you more, but that's one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Scanlon, back to you.
In your role as superintendent, how would you be an advocate for public education? I know you've touched on this already, but...
Yeah, I think you have a real responsibility as superintendent to be advocating wherever you happen to be. So one of the most important pieces for me has been to be an active member of either Rotary or the Chamber. In each of the communities, I made that decision based on which is the more active body and actually had more push out into the community of the kinds of things that we were doing. And as a participant in that, all the way to while they were showing the robot on Fair in the Square, I was flipping burgers for the Rotary. But being that symbol of how important the school system is and how important a part of the community it is. And also to make sure that the community knows what's going on. In Watertown, the Rotary is phenomenal. So I found very early in the first year that no matter what I went to, half of my Rotarians were with me. So began to give more and more information to my fellow Rotarians so that it blew out into the community and everybody understood. The other thing is I like to do a community meeting. A lot of times it's for strategic planning, but in many cases it's to make sure that the community has an opportunity to engage in the process of understanding the school district better, talking about strengths and weaknesses of the school district, and talking about the values of the community that play itself out in the school district. In Plymouth, we actually use the Baldrige process. I wouldn't use it again because the grant that I had to be able to do that free, because it's very expensive, doesn't exist anymore, so it didn't cost Plymouth anything. But we actually canvassed the community and we had about 300 people across the community that filled out a survey for us that then went through and gave us a path for what we should be looking at. And then we had a Baldrige leadership team from across the district that was in the room, got the information, and made some decisions going into the future. So I think that's important to engage the community. In Watertown, when I got there, there was, it was a split community over the school district at the time. So we actually held a meeting fairly early in the process. The goal of the meeting was to get the community talking to each other because they had been talking over their differences, and there really weren't differences. What I was hearing as I came into the community is complete and total agreement on what needed to change. The disagreement was over how to do it. So the format for the morning was to talk about first the strengths of the school district. We very quickly found that that was common. Everybody identified the same thing. We seated the tables so that each of the table of 10 was representative of the group that was in the room. We had 125 people. They identified what the strengths of the district was. They very quickly identified the areas. Math was one of the most important things that they identified as an issue. And so they gave us a charge of how to move forward with a strategic plan. I kept that in the hands of the school committee because what happens frequently to strategic plans is they take 3 years to get a strategic plan, and then it really doesn't move anything. So we were trying to get to a strategic plan in a year, and we did. And it was representative of the community so that when we presented budget, when we presented curriculum changes, they were all things that the community had identified that we wanted to get done, so they didn't have much resistance. But that's also a great communication tool. We got a lot of people out of that meeting that became very active politically in Watertown. Some of them ended up on the city council, some of them ended up on school committee, and some of them just ended up actively engaged in public meetings that they weren't engaged in before. So it really generates a lot of excitement and a lot of effort to get the community together. But my responsibility is to make sure that we're showing the right product. One of my strengths and weaknesses is I'm honest. So if you ask me a direct question, you get an honest answer. So if there's something that we need to work on, I can't say that it's fine. But we also need to showcase what is fine. And the best piece for us, and again, the Rotary in Watertown, they gave out a lot of scholarships, a lot of scholarship money. So the kids had to actually present at the Rotary. So they had 2 kids at every Rotary meeting presenting, 5 minutes, and you can't buy that public relations. The kids were articulate, they were clear, they were excited. We had a teacher come with the 2 kids each time, and the Rotarians walked away from that meeting going, I can't believe how articulate these kids are, how clear they are. I couldn't do that when I was their age. And that was a public relations piece you can't buy. Our chorus was all over town. There wasn't an event that they wouldn't go to, at least some of them, to make sure that people could see the quality of what we were doing. The drama program in Framingham, it's as good as it gets. We did the Laramie Project, which I had to support. It wasn't hard to support it. We had the Westboro Church there protesting us, but it was a community event. We had adults in the community who acted in the Laramie Project alongside the kids. We had a lot of publicity for it. It was packed every night, and the community felt really good about that. So it's getting people engaged in what we're doing, because I don't worry about the kids. The kids deliver. We just got to make sure people see that.
Thank you.
Dave, back to you.
Dr. Hiersche, would your family support your taking this position, and would they be prepared to move into our community?
Say that again? No. My wife works in Falmouth. I live in Bourne. However, what I would do is I would live in the community. So I would have an apartment up here. You can't, I live 24 hours a day, my job, usually 5 days a week. So I live in the community no matter how you look at it. I had an apartment in Hopkinton, I had an apartment in Watertown, I had an apartment in Framingham. It's just, you know, it's an interesting time. It was wonderful in Hopkinton because I lived next to Colella's Market, and if I wanted to know how the school district was going, I just had to go to Colella's Market and go shopping, and somebody would tell me how we were doing. But from that perspective, I'm absolutely committed to living in the community, but my family won't be.
Thanks.
Emery, you have the next question.
Can you tell us about your supervisory experience of both new and experienced teachers, and the same for administrators?
Well, I feel that I have a strong obligation to mentoring. So let me start with teachers. So as I look at new teachers and veteran teachers, let's start with the new teachers. So every place I've been, including Framingham, I've met with every new teacher before they get hired. So the principal sends me their recommendation, and I meet with the individual teacher. It's mostly because I love to see the new people we're hiring, but it also gives me an opportunity to see what the principals are hiring. So in one of my previous experiences, the principals were hiring aides who were high quality, had been aides in the building, but they weren't going through a real search. So my concern was that they were missing somebody out there if you don't go through a whole search. So at the very beginning, after having 3 or 4 people come to me, I figured that out. So we had a conversation about how you go through the hiring process. Because the new people to the district, you have to make an obligation to make sure that you get the best candidate every single time. I always caution people that if they're not sure, don't hire. I've found many people who are unsuccessful over time were panic hires. So school's about to open and I don't want to open with a substitute. well, you're better off opening with a substitute than that candidate that you don't think is going to make it. So I do mentoring, a lot of conversation about hiring with principals to make sure that we're on the same page from the standpoint of what we're looking for. We used to look for the teacher in the four walls of the classroom. How good are they? It's not enough anymore. You know, it really is who they are. Do they have an impact on the building? Low finance times has helped because I've said to my principals, if you are going to go out of the norm of hiring somebody at X number of dollars, then you need to make the case to me on how that person's going to have an impact in your building as a whole. And then we make some real decisions around opening the purse strings up for some people who are going to have that kind of impact. With veteran teachers, I've done a lot of work around, this has got to be the 5th or 6th time I've put together a supervision and evaluation model. We always do the initial conversation together because I've never found that the teachers and the administrators are on a different page from what they think we should be doing. And so it's putting in a good system that has checks and balances to say that a teacher never gets to a point where they're in trouble that they didn't know that was coming. So creating a real solid system of there's issues that you can't clean up, you're now in a system of remediation over these issues to get to the other end of this and make the decision that we need to make as a school district. I found over time that the teachers that have moved on, for the most part, are people that the teachers thought should move on as well. So it's a matter of making sure we do things right, we do things with respect, and we do things that always remembers that there are kids on the other end of every decision we make around personnel. So veteran staff, I've been known to, I have one principal that's probably still one of my best friends. He will tell you that I kicked him my first year I was superintendent there. He respected that I kicked him. He didn't like it. However, he, unlike some people, he internalized the fact that I had that conversation with him and came out and became the principal, not only the principal he was before when he was tremendous, but became the leader of the elementary principals in that school district again. So sometimes people just need resetting, and we have to know how to do that. The other part of it is working with administrators to make sure that as they supervise teachers or staff or whatever, we're all on the same page, so we're not sending mixed messages. So I typically have been probably the most experienced principal in the district as well. So a lot of it's, you know, feel free to call me on the phone and come over and we'll brainstorm. And if you don't want to pay any attention to me at that level, that's fine. But if you're asking my opinion, I'll give that as well. But going through that process to make sure that we know what to do, we do it well, we do it with respect, and we make sure that there's a good outcome for kids in the long run. For the administrative team, we are a team, and we spend a lot of time, whether they're new or veterans, talking about how to do the best job that we can. I've done case studies with the staff. When I was in Watertown, I got the surprise to find out that I was replacing all 5 of my principals in the first year. So we had to come up to speed very fast. But it was an opportunity for us to grow together. Usually there's a blend, and a lot of it's making sure that we understand each other. I'm real clear with people early on that I'd like to say it's because I'm getting older, but it has nothing to do with it. I'm pretty direct. So I had a principal in Plymouth. He would always call me on the phone and he would say, "So am I in trouble because I need to meet with you?" And I said, "No." He said, well, how would I know if I was in trouble or not? I said, trust me, you would know if you're in trouble. So it's having that conversation beforehand, you know? I mean, there's a difference. I used to tell him, there's a difference if I say to him, can you come up and see me in the next couple days, versus I'll be in your office in 5 minutes. And kind of take that hint. But, you know, it's getting that out there to be clear, to be straight. And my administrative meetings are growth for all of us, so they have to be safe. I expect people to be honest in meetings. I also expect when we're done, it doesn't go anywhere. But the honesty is really important. You know, we need to be honest with each other. If you think I've got 12 heads, maybe I do. But if you think I have 12 heads, but you never actually say that, how am I going to actually think about that from the standpoint of whether what we're doing is the appropriate thing? So I see my role as mentoring, whether it's a veteran or a new administrator. I see team building as the way we grow together. And I make the difficult decisions on occasion when it's necessary. I did have a principal that didn't make it in the first year. There was really nothing wrong with that principal other than it was not the right fit for the community, and it just wasn't going to work. So we worked our way out of that.
Thank you.
Matt, back to you.
Our special education population is approximately 17%. Of that, 115 students are placed out of district. How would you go about bringing the 115 students home to our district, and what programs would you recommend?
First, you have to do assessment on what that says. In Framingham, I had a large district. We had a lot of internal programs, and we were able to do that because we were a large district. So we had a lot of sub-separate programs. In smaller communities, it's not necessarily that easy. And I've always said that you have to do a cost-benefit analysis as you're looking at bringing programs in. And there's a tipping point even for an internal program where that program is as costly for the district internally as it would have been if you sent the child out. And we may or may not be able to do as good a job as some of the placements going out. The second part is being really active in the collaborative process. I've always been an advocate for collaboratives because it's that tweener between being able to build your own program and having to pay for expensive out-of-district placements. Part of our challenge in this part of the state, not just here, but Watertown and Framingham, is that we have the most private special education placements probably per capita than anywhere in the country. So there is an ability to get access to something that wasn't the same as when I was in Plymouth. So a parent who was sending their child to the Perkins School for the Deaf in Watertown from Plymouth had to factor in that we could not get that child to the Perkins School in under an hour if our life depended on it, because you got to get to the other side of Boston. So a lot of parents worked more closely with the school to come up with a solution that didn't have a kid on the van going through Boston each day than sometimes happens out here. I think you have to work with your parent population. You need to make sure that they know what resources are available. I think most parents do understand that there's a fiscal cost to some of the placements that we're making. I have been a strong advocate for circuit breaker for the last 12 years and will continue. Circuit breaker is the more important financial source than Chapter 70 to the community, because circuit breaker is dollar for dollar on what we pay above the $40,000 minimum. Everything else, Chapter 70, until they fix the formula, it's not going to make any sense. So that's an important part of the process, because in many cases there is a state obligation to kids who are costing what they cost because of the needs that they have. They're getting good education. But the property tax was never meant to also cover some of the costs that we have that we're incurring with special education. So it's important for us as a school district to be focused on how do we provide the best education we can for all kids, and that the parents understand what we can provide and understand it well, and then start getting at some of the things that are causing the out-of-district placements to occur. But the other part of it, and it goes back to the caution I gave initially, when you're looking at internal programs, you need to make sure that you cost it out well, because it sometimes is not as cost effective as one might think. When you staff it properly, when you create a space that has to be dedicated to a set of kids, when you get the right technology in place and all of those kinds of things, and make sure that you're doing that cost analysis to make sure that you're doing it properly. But it's always looking at doing what we can for kids internally in the district, because there are kids. We can always provide better inclusionary opportunities for kids in district than they can out of district, because they're not running schools that they can include in. So keeping kids home is really important. And the other part of keeping kids home is the transportation end of it, because transportation end often costs as much as the placement. So it's an important part of the process. Plus, it's keeping in contact with the parents and making sure that the parents are part of what we're doing with their kids.
Thank you.
Steve, before we move on to the last of the official questions, I have a few questions that were posed by the audience.
Okay.
And they're here for all candidates. So the first is, if you could describe for us your core values.
My core values? My core values are all around kids. So when I look at myself in the mirror in the morning after making a difficult decision, my core value requires that I can honestly answer that the decision I made was in the best interest of kids. So that's as important as anything to me. And I've had experience in times when even when I was a little less experienced, I wrestled with, but the adults aren't going to be happy. But the kids aren't getting what they should. And I would safely say that for the most part of my career, I've never made that decision. I've always made this decision. So that's important. The other core value is that I believe all kids can learn. I think that we have to be careful how we say that, because all kids can learn to the greatest capacity that they have. And I think we have an obligation to do that. And I think the kids who have been probably shortchanged more than any have been the kids on the upper end. Because we just haven't had the resources to be able to do things that we believe we should. I learned a lot over the course of my career. And so the Gifted and Talented program in Framingham, I not only defended, but I got it through the $6 million worth of reductions because they were doing great work for a set of kids that really needed it. And we were doing all of the right things with our Gifted and Talented program. So we were doing the assessment to make sure that the kids were truly gifted and talented, not just smart. And the kids couldn't get in the program unless they had that. And in many cases, those kids were not functioning well academically. And that was one of the keys. So defending that was important because it provided an opportunity for kids and support for kids that we weren't supporting well, who were in many cases going to be the leaders going out, if in fact they could get on the right path. So going through that process of making sure that we're hitting all kids and supporting all kids is critical for me. And it's part of my core value because I do believe all kids can learn. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that all kids can learn. I think the other part of my core value is that I believe that public education in this country, in Massachusetts, needs to change. I think that we are still doing the system that I taught in the beginning of my career. And I don't think the educators are the barrier. I think the barrier is the other people who believe they know what we should be doing and are forcing it on us. It used to just be the state. Now it's the feds. And the reality is that for us, I believe the answers are in this school district. I believe the answers for Beverly are here. And as educators working together, we need to take bold moves. We need to be brave, and we need to take risks, and it needs to be an environment that supports that. So I think that there does need to be change. I think technology is forcing it. I think the kids are going to be forcing it because they have access to learning that nobody had access to before. So I think it forces us looking at change. I think the final piece for me is my own self-esteem. So from an ethical standpoint, my ethics are very important to me. And in my organization, I expect ethical behavior, and we have conversations about that all the time. So while it might sound good, is it legitimately the way we should be operating? And it's sometimes hard when your ethics are challenged. But again, I always have to look at myself in the mirror in the morning, and if I can't look at myself in the mirror in the morning, then it just doesn't work. So those are some of my core beliefs.
Feel free to take a break and have a little drink here. I've got a few more to go. The next question has to do with increasing the arts in our elementary and middle school curriculum. Do you see a way to increase those? I know you touched on STEAM versus STEM earlier.
Well, when we went through our reductions in Framingham, we had a music teacher and an art teacher in every school. In addition to that, we had an orchestra program. So as we were looking at the reductions that we had to make, we eliminated the orchestra program. We eliminated the orchestra program with the understanding that it was going to come back. When we looked at the effect that the orchestra program was having on the kids in the district, it had gotten to the point where it wasn't doing what it had done before. So it wasn't hitting all kids, it wasn't convenient for all kids, and it was during the day, so kids were getting helter-skelter pulled out of their classes. And if you're doing a literacy initiative to raise the literacy scores, and you're doing a math initiative to raise the math scores, having kids vacating math class and literacy class to go to orchestra just didn't make sense. So we made that reduction with the understanding that we would do some work to bring it back. So we put together a task force immediately afterwards with the understanding that I didn't think we could come up with funding for at least 2 or 3 years, but that we would find and advocate for funding again, but it needed to be a different program. So if I understand the newspaper right, the orchestra program will be back in Framingham Public Schools this coming year. So they figured out a better way to do it, and it won't be pulling kids out anymore. But from the standpoint of that experience for kids, whether it's music or art, it is the culmination of everything that they're doing in class, all their other classes, if you do it correctly. So as a mathematician, I was a terrible musician, but I can see the math in music. As an art student with a math background, I can draw perspective and things like that. Not particularly artistic, but very precise. And that's an actual function of my learning as an individual in everything else I do. So it's the application. So I think it's incredibly important that a community hang on to those resources no matter what. And it's a challenge because it's not as simple as saying we won't cut that. It's as simple as saying we're not really going to get to the point where it's going to get eliminated because it's way too valuable for us. The third piece for me, in deference to my father, is phys ed. He was a phys ed teacher and a director of physical education. It's the same scenario from the standpoint that in a good phys ed class, it's the application of mathematics, it's the application of science, and all of those things are the way in which we enrich the learning environment for kids. Without that, they're just coming to school to learn subjects that hopefully they apply away from school.
Thank you. The next audience question was, as leader of the district, what is your vision for the role of extra and co-curricular activities for students?
I coached for 11 years. I was a swimming coach and a tennis coach, and I would never give up those experiences with kids as a coach because it's a really important part of kids' lives and kids' motivation. I was fortunate to coach swimming because I didn't have to cut. I could just take every kid that came to the pool. But it's getting kids to understand working together as a team. I love kids who do an individual sport and a team sport because you learn how to function in both environments, and they're really very different. Extracurricular activities, like I said about Framingham, the drama program couldn't have been any better. The luxury of being a school of 2,100 kids is when we had a musical, we never ran out of voices. So that's a little bit of a luxury with a very large school, but that opportunity for kids to perform, to see their friends there watching their performances or involved in that is just tremendous. And it's the piece that makes school work. It's the piece that makes school fun. It's the piece that makes school important. So I did a lot of counseling as a high school principal with kids who wanted to work but didn't have to, about what they were losing by not participating because they were spending all their time trying to buy a car. And getting them involved and figuring out a way to get them involved in extracurricular activities, whether they're co-curricular or extracurricular, is critical. We just put together a combined hockey program in Hopkinton with Dover Sherburne to get a girls program going. I did a lot of work in Watertown. We did a lot of work to get Watertown to accept where they were as a community around extracurricular activities in a school system and now build off of that. So we made some very difficult league changes to make sure that the kids were competitive all the time. We hired very good coaches to build the programs up to make sure that there was participation. And we spent countless hours with what was an athletic advisory committee, getting them to understand that when they were 1,500 kids, their football team could be much stronger than now they're 750 kids. With a full soccer program that's pretty good, with a really good field hockey program, which was destroying the girls' soccer team because there's only so many girls to go around and only so many boys to go around. So we were very careful to get that understanding in the community, and right now they're on the right track. They're doing really well. And the kids are back, and the participation is back, and the excitement in the community is back. But it was a resetting of values and what we were actually capable of.
Thank you. The next question refers to our high school one-to-one laptop program.
Yep.
How would you evaluate its success?
I would spend some time in the classrooms because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So actually seeing what goes on in the classroom when the kids are there. The other part is talking to kids. So what do you see? So we did a survey last year, and surveys are really invaluable. We did the parents, we did the teachers, and we did the kids. And some of the questions were around how it had changed instruction in the classroom and the perception. So the parents were about 50-50. The teachers were a little better than 50-50. The kids were like 75%. It had changed instruction for them in the classroom. So it was really interesting because as we shared that out, it had an impact on the parents and it had an impact on the staff to re-look at what was actually going on in their classroom. And some of the things that you would see in a classroom on a one-to-one piece is, you throw a concept out there, the kids are already researching, they're online researching, and so as the conversation occurred, they actually were adding to the conversation because they could, because they had the laptop there. And I'm not sure everybody understood that until the kids said that that's what they were doing. So everybody kind of had a sense that stuff had changed, but the kids had a real understanding of what in their mind had changed. I think the other part of it is looking at the leases. I also think that the big piece I would look at is the sustainability of the model, because everybody's dealing with the sustainability of the model. Amazon is actually on the verge of pushing their Kindle significantly into the iPad market and backing it up with free educational content. So it's also keeping track of what's the next part of the market. So we had made in Hopkinton a decision to do the Airs and not do the iPads at the time. The second year I was part of the decision, and we looked at what was available for iPads versus what was available for laptops. We continued with the laptops for one more year because the iPads hadn't quite caught up yet. So that was the other part. And then the other piece that I would always look for in assessment is our infrastructure robust enough to handle a ramping up of the one-to-one environment, because it's only going to grow. And what I learned a long time ago is that the use of technology doesn't grow in a linear fashion, it grows in a geometric fashion, so it blasts through the roof. So if you're not really paying attention to your infrastructure to make sure it's robust for 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to have some problems. And that's the crippler of all technology initiatives, is if it gets to a point where it's not working because you don't have something robust enough to do it, then people stop using it. Kids do.
Thank you. What programs and activities do you feel have contributed to Beverly's success, and how would you build upon that success?
Well, I think the AIR that's gone to level 1, that's a lot of work. And I think that analyzing what actually went through to cause that to happen should be replicable. I would imagine it probably already is being replicated, but it is replicable. The other part of it is making sure that you can sustain that. Being in an area of school districts this past year that a lot were level 1, many of them have gone to level 2. Their kids actually didn't do any worse than they had done the year before. It's just that their growth and some of the targets that they have, it's just not sustainable. So it's making sure that we find a way to do the sustainability of that. I think that the community has demonstrated support of the schools by building this building and moving forward with addressing the middle school. And that's significant. That's a community statement that is not small. So I think that's really critical. I think when I look at the MCAS scores and I look at DART, I love DART. It's probably my math background. Financially, we're not that bad. We're not great, but we're not that bad. So looking at that and doing comparisons with other school districts, I think is important as we do that. And our performance is good. I think that the one thing that gave me a caution is the numbers of kids taking AP courses and taking the test versus doing 3s and 4s needs to be improved. But I don't want to make a statement one way or the other on what that is, because it may be that we just ramped up the AP courses at this point and the rest of it will follow. So I think that's an important part as you go through that. And a lot of it's raising questions for me that, I just have, I want to learn and understand all of the work that people have been doing here.
Okay, this is a multi-parter, so I'll read it one at a time. Tell us about a decision that your school committee made that you disagreed with.
I'm trying to think. I'm not sure. Sure, we've been on the different page. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about the year we had the $6 million reduction. So the community through town meeting had been hammering on the school committee for about 3 years about what they had been spending and the fact that the community didn't know whether they were spending the right things. And the school committee came into that process probably because of what they'd experienced. Wanting us to get close to what the CFO was going to recommend for our budget. I didn't agree with that from an educational standpoint, and I hadn't been there long enough to know whether I agreed with it from a strategic standpoint. So we went through the process. We had the conversation about what I felt I could do. I made the case for the budget that I thought would work, given the fiscal responsibility that we had and the circumstances that the community found itself in. If you look at the $6,000, I've broken it down in $2 million pieces. I always make 6 million, 6,000, because even to this day I don't like it. The first 2 million were structural changes within the school district that I was not only pretty comfortable with, it was stuff that we really needed to do. The second 2 million, with some real solid work, was going to get us through a year where people did not lose their jobs and we were going to be moving forward. I worked with the Teachers Association to get concessions that year to help us through that budget process. The last $2 million was going to be something that was going to take a long time to recover from. And I was very clear about that through that whole process. The school committee, because they were afraid of the $8 million reduction, had made the strategic decision to focus on getting closer to a middle ground with town hall and the school department. So at the point in which we had gotten to the point where they had made the determination that that's where we were going, at that point all of my energy went towards making that work. The argument was done. At that point, it was time for us to do the right thing for kids and making sure whatever happened and came out of it was successful. In retrospect, we wouldn't have got the from 8 to 6, we wouldn't have gotten it there had the school committee not done what they did. So their political sense probably was accurate at the time, because we actually got the Board of Selectmen were on board. Everybody was on board at the end for what we got.
Thank you. You actually jumped ahead and read my card for me, so that's good.
Good.
So the last of the real questions. If you are hired as our superintendent, describe for me what the Beverly Public Schools will look like 5 years from today.
5 years from now. I don't think you want me to dream, but no, we'll be known for global education. Our classrooms will be high-tech classrooms. The teachers will be able to deliver their coursework in a variety of ways, both blended learning, online, and in the classroom, and will be expert at doing that. And it will be a great place to work, and we won't have any trouble hiring or keeping people.
Thank you. And actually, thank you for spending almost 2 hours with us this afternoon. We really appreciate you sharing your educational leadership and your experiences. And if there's anything else you'd like to add at this time, please feel free.
No, I think I'm all set. I think you asked everything.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much.
You don't want me to walk away with my mic?
So,
Thanks.
Nice job.
Thanks
a lot.
Thanks.
So I just want to remind people, thank you first of all for BevCam. They are showing these
as quickly as they can do edits to them and get them online. I know that those from Tuesday are being shown now and will be by tomorrow morning. Our next meeting is tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, this same location. If anybody would like to join us again, BevCam will be filming that. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Paul.
Second.
Thank you, Chris. All in favor? Okay, we're adjourned, folks.
Thank you.